And you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories of the hour. King Charles welcomes President Donald Trump to Windsor Castle with a carriage procession, guard of honour and military reception. The leaders share a coach amid friendly exchanges with a flight past and state banquet still to come. Israel launches its long-awaited ground offensive into Gaza City and opens a new 48-hour route for civilians to flee. Hundreds of thousands remain sheltered amid fears of permanent displacement as officials warn the operation could last months. Saudi Arabia strongly condemns Israel's ground assault on Gaza City and urges the UN Security Council to act. The kingdom accuses Israel of killings, starvation and forced displacement as regional criticism mounts and Qatar calls it a war of genocide. Germany says the ball is still in Iran's court after European powers held talks on Tehran's nuclear program. Berlin warns sanctions will snap back unless Iran meets conditions, saying steps taken so far are not enough. The European Commission proposes suspending trade preferences worth nearly €6 billion on Israeli exports over the Gaza war. EU diplomats also consider sanctions on Israeli ministers, violent settlers and senior Hamas members. Utah prosecutors say they will seek the death penalty for Tyler Robinson, accused of killing conservative activist Charlie Kirk. Court documents reveal text messages where Robinson allegedly confessed, saying he had enough of his hatred. Yulia Navalnaya says foreign lab tests on biological samples from her late husband Alexei Navalny confirm he was poisoned. Navalny died suddenly in a Russian prison last year, with the Kremlin dismissing claims of foul play as nonsense. Villarreal midfielder Thomas Partey pleads not guilty in a London court to multiple rape and sexual assault charges involving 3 women. The alleged offences date back to his time at Arsenal between 2021 and 2022. Now we start this hour in Europe, where US President Donald Trump and First Lady Melania Trump arrived at Windsor Castle today for the first full day of his second state visit to the United Kingdom. Greeted by Prince William and Princess Catherine, the couple stepped out of Marine One to a ceremonial welcome. The visit marks a significant diplomatic moment between the two nations, with discussions on trade, defence and bilateral ties on the agenda. The day's events also featured Trump and King Charles inspecting the Guard at Windsor, followed by a private lunch. The royal family and Trumps later took part in a horse-drawn procession through the castle grounds. Okay, this is a huge story coming out of the United Kingdom, from which we are joined by Alexander Seal. He is a French and British journalist, and he joins us live from London to discuss all these recent developments from Donald Trump's second state visit to the United Kingdom. Alexander, thank you very much for joining us. Alexander, what can we expect from this? We can see behind you, you are there's a huge crowd behind you. Where are you? What can you tell us? What's going on in London?
Yes, so I'm at Oxford Street, on Regent Street, next to the BBC. There is a stage and there are lots and lots of protesters demonstrating against Donald Trump, against Gaza and Ukraine, and they're all here to say, stop Donald Trump, he's not welcome in the UK. Last night, when the US president arrived in the UK, there were some images that were projected on Windsor Castle of Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein and Prince Andrew. So it's clear that it's state physics is starting quite well for the projector.
Yes, and Alexander, we've seen those visuals of Donald Trump getting into that grand golden carriage along with the king. Beyond the pomp, what are the real diplomatic stakes of this visit?
Well, first of all, the Prime Minister, Sir Summer, he hired the UK ambassador to the US, Lord Super Magazine, who was placed to Jeffrey Epstein. And then afterwards, we're going to talk about the Middle East, because as you know, the UK has announced that they will support the Palestinian state. So, and the US president is siding with the Israeli president. So there's going to be a lot of tension around the diplomatic side tomorrow, except outside London. But today it's pomp and pageantry with the royal family today.
Yes, indeed. And how, of course, are the British media framing this state visit? Infamous, the British media for criticising the US president. What is the feeling around the country right now?
The feeling, the British media is saying the historic visit, because it's the US president's second state visit. He came in 2019 when Queen Elizabeth was queen, and he arrived at Windsor at that time, and now it's in Windsor. And the procession and the carriages today wasn't in public. It was at Windsor Castle in the gardens, so there was no public. And it's really after Charlie Kirk's death that security has been tightened. There were lots of policemen at the protest and in Windsor. There was a no-fly zone. And tonight, for the state banquet, the leader of the Lebanon, Abdullah, is going to boycott the banquet.
Okay, Alexander, I believe we're having some audio issues there with you. Thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. It has been a pleasure. We will, of course, bring you all up to date on that state visit with Donald Trump to the United Kingdom as he visits Windsor Castle. Of course, stay tuned here on NewsX World. We now turn over to West Asia for our next update, where Iran has dismissed US criticism of its missile program as nonsense, with its foreign ministry spokesman Esmail Baqai saying that the United States has no right to comment on the defensive capabilities of a nation determined to preserve its independence. Let's listen in to the other statements made by Baqai.
آمریکا قرار نیست در مورد توانمندی‌های دفاعی ملتی که تصمیم گرفته استقلال خودش رو به هر قیمتی حفظ بکنه، روی پای خودش بایسته و در مقابل زیاده‌خواهی و تعرض و تجاوز بیگانگان از جمله آمریکا و رژیم صهیونیستی ایستادگی بکنه، بخواد در این مورد
This comes after US Secretary of State Marco Rubio visited Israel on Monday and held a joint news conference with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, warning that a nuclear-armed Iran with missiles that could reach distant targets poses an unacceptable risk to Israel, the United States and the world. Moreover, Rubio reiterated that the US would continue pressure on Tehran until it changes course. Earlier this month, Iran's security chief, Ali Lajani, said Tehran remained open to nuclear talks with Washington, but ruled out any limits on its missile program. Okay, we are here discussing Iran's nuclear capabilities, a huge topic that has been a long topic of diplomatic negotiations and, of course, a 12-day war with Israel. Ross Feingold joins us now. He is a political analyst and he joins us live from Taipei in Taiwan. Ross, thank you very much for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you on the program. Ross, Iran's foreign ministry has dismissed the United States criticism as, quote, nonsense. How much of this is rhetoric and how much reflects Tehran's long-term posture when it comes to its nuclear capabilities?
Of course, Iran is going to respond negatively, even using words that are undiplomatic in response to criticism from the United States about Iran's missile programs or even a resumption of its nuclear weapons research programs. I think the key thing here is that despite the brief war in June, it's clear that this issue is unresolved. The issue of Iran's development of long-range conventional missiles, as well as the issue of its development of nuclear weapons, despite the U.S. and President Trump's claims about obliterating Iran's capabilities. But we know that they still have some capability to continue to pursue nuclear weapons. So this issue is far from over. And this is not just a United States or an Israel issue. Other countries in the region, no matter their views or their anger towards Israel about the war in Gaza, other countries in the region, the Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, none of them want Iran to develop further its missile, let alone its nuclear weapons capabilities. So other than Russia and perhaps China, no one in the world, and specifically in the region, is hoping that Iran can continue to develop these capabilities. So Iran's response to the U.S. is not going to get much sympathy from anyone, maybe other than Russia and China.
Okay, Ross, do stay with us. We have further updates from related developments. Germany has said that the ball is in Iran's court following talks between the UK, France and Germany and Tehran over its nuclear program. The discussions come after European powers last month set a 30-day deadline for the potential re-imposition of snapback sanctions if no deal is reached. A German Foreign Ministry spokesman said the offer to consider a temporary extension of the snapback sanctions, provided Iran meets certain conditions, remains on the table, but noted that Iran's current steps have so far been insufficient. We are once again joined by Ross Feingold to discuss this further. Ross, Germany says the ball is in Iran's court here. How much leverage do the UK, France and Germany realistically have in these talks?
That's a really interesting question, because one way to look at this is the European countries are saying to Iran, we're willing to remove sanctions, or we're willing to do business with you, we're willing to help your economy, which Iran desperately needs. No matter what one's political perspective is on Iran's domestic politics, like the government, dislike the government, everyone in Iran, from the government to the corporate world to the common people, they all want sanctions removed. They all want to participate in the international economy. And so the Europeans are probably very frustrated, because they're saying to the Iranians, we won't impose greater sanctions. We're willing to do business with you. We're even willing to look past some of our concerns about your human rights record. We're not going to attack you. We don't have the capability to do that like the United States does or Israel does. And Iran is being recalcitrant. And again, this is extremely frustrating to the European countries who genuinely want to see a deal. And again, they're willing to do business with Iran and welcome Iran back, at least into the international community of trading nations. And Iran just doesn't want to do it. Iran wants to insist on developing weapons that they might say it's defensive, but ultimately some of them are offensive, and they're a threat to other countries in the region. So I'm very sympathetic to the frustration of the European countries in this regard.
And Ross, looking ahead, if these snapback sanctions are reimposed, does that effectively kill the chance of any new nuclear deal, or is there still space for diplomacy here?
It will be difficult. I never say never about space for diplomacy. And certainly President Trump has been willing, with regard to repeated issues in different places around the world, he's been willing to go against the common thought process when it comes to talks, and involve himself with talks. And some people criticize him over this. How could you deal with Putin? How could you deal with Kim Jong-un? But to be fair to President Trump, he's willing to put his own political capital into those kinds of talks. So I would say we should not say it would be completely closed off, but it would certainly make it difficult, because to the extent that Iran proceeds with these programs, then it makes negotiations more difficult, because Iran will have already accelerated its capabilities versus where they are today.
Ross Feingold, it is a pleasure, as always, to have you here on the programme. Thank you very much for joining us. We stay in West Asia next, but where Israel has announced the opening of a new evacuation route out of Gaza City, offering civilians in the region a 48-hour window to flee as it plans to intensify efforts to root out Hamas fighters. The newly accessible Salahudin Road is marked by Israel as a, quote, safe corridor, as Israel's latest attempt to urge civilians to leave the war-torn region. Leaflets were dropped over Gaza, urged to evacuate the civilians as per the yellow-marked routes and instructions from Israeli forces. Let's listen in to some of the residents.
وين اروح مش طالع وين اطلع ما في وين نروح لا في مكان ولا في شيء احنا قاعدين بدنا نموت ونموت هان حط طريقنا الناس فتحوا لك طريق واد غزه واد غزه في النهايه وين بدك تصل يعني وين بدك تروح ما في مكان ولا في ارض ولا في نت ولا في ميه ولا في اي حاجه امرنا للنزوح صعب يعني ليش بدنا نروح النزوح صعب جدا الموت افضل يعني من النزوح بالنسبه لنا الموت افضل لنا والله يا شيخ يعني الحرب رضينا فيه لكن النزوح لا
انا مش عاوز نزوح يعني كلمه نزوح صعبه فيش مصاري اصلا تنزح اللي بينزح بيكون مع مصاري وانا راجل ماليش مصدر دخل وين بدي اروح
يعني وين نروح وين نلاقي يعني نروحنا على الجنوب ميتين وين ضلينا هان ميتين طب وين نروح يا عم يشوفوا لنا حل هاي ابني الكبير معاه 7-8 تنفار استشهد ايش اسوي؟ ايش اقول للعالم؟ تعالوا شوفونا يا عالم، تعالوا شوفونا مشان الله، اطلعوا على حالتنا، اطلعوا لحياتنا، اطلعوا ولا إن حياه ولا إن مستقبل ولا إن عمر ولا إن حاجه.
Okay, we're now joined by Mohammed Osman. He is an international relations specialist and he joins us live from Cairo, Egypt. Thank you very much, Mohammed, for joining us here on the programme. Today, the IDF said that 350,000 people have now left Gaza City out of a population of around 1 million, leaving over 600,000 people still staying there as Israel continues its ground offensive to take the entire urban hub. We've seen visuals of these leaflets, Mohammed, urging civilians to follow Israeli instructions. Do such leaflets genuinely protect people, or do they simply shift responsibility onto the displaced?
Thank you for having me, Thomas. Well, no, they don't. And they do not exonerate Israel from indulging in their more killing sprees and more massacres in the Gaza Strip. Of course, this is not the first time Gaza City is being targeted by the Israelis. This is not the first time such leaflets have been dropped on Gaza City. However, of course, this is the first time Israel is launching an all-out assault to basically not only capture the city, as some might imagine, they seek to completely depopulate the city of Gaza and demolish it, flatten it. And we have seen such precedents in Gaza before. We've seen this in the town of Beit Hanun in northern Gaza, in Beit Lahia, just up to the north of the city of Gaza. We've seen it in the city of Rafah on the border with Egypt, which was basically wiped off the map by the Israelis. The town of Rafah ceases to exist right now. And about more than half of the city of Khan Yunis in southern Gaza, the second largest city in Gaza, has been flattened as well. And now we are seeing a repetition of this criminal deed in Gaza City, the last standing urban space. And what is Israel's endgame by undertaking such a rash military policy that is tantamount to ethnic cleansing and war crimes and crimes against humanity? Well, the endgame is the depopulation of northern Gaza, the reduction of the territory of the Gaza Strip, maybe the annexation of parts of the Gaza Strip, as reports have indicated earlier a couple of months back, that the Americans did greenlight the idea of Israel annexing parts of Gaza, namely northern Gaza. Even Itmar Ben-Gvir, the Minister of National Security, promised some of his officers in a conference or in a seminar or whatever they call it. He was talking to them and he promised them a sea view compound on the rubble of the city of Gaza,
in the future, which means he's indicating that these areas will be settled by Israeli settlers somewhere down the line. So it seems that this is part of the expansionist policies of the Israeli government, an attempt for the realization of the so-called Greater Israel, a complete liquidation of the Palestinian cause, even though it is internationally recognized as a legitimate cause. Palestinian rights are internationally recognized. And the United Nations, most of the member states of the United Nations, over 150 countries, recognize Palestine as a state. Yet this does not prevent Israel from moving forward with its sinister plans. And of course, finally, they wish to completely displace the Palestinians out of Gaza. And of course, this will cause a detrimental, sharp deterioration of the situation in the Middle East. And it might actually cause further conflict in the region with countries neighboring Israel if Israel actually attempts to displace those Palestinians forcefully into Egypt, for example.
Yes, Mohammed Osman, do stay with us. We have a related development coming up. Tel Aviv-based screenwriter Haggai Levy, who has been a long-time critic of Israel's siege on Gaza, has warned that Israel's growing cultural isolation is hurting its artistic community. In a recent interview, Levy said that many artists are considering leaving the country, citing shrinking budgets, restricted freedom of speech, and the impact of international boycotts. Let's take a listen in to what he said.
I would say, 90% of the people of the artist community in Israel, either it's cinema or plastic arts or music, they are so much, they're fighting, they're in the streets, and they are suffering because no budgets, less freedom of speech, so they are struggling. And boycotting them is actually weaken the only people who can make a change, maybe, or at least fighting. So many people, everyone around me, talking about the possibility of living. It's just really so hard to live, especially in a specific age. But people are, ask themselves, how will I find work? Will I find friends? Will I find family? I mean, it's so hard to be an immigrant. This is a war crime in a huge scale and crimes against humanity. I'm not sure if it's genocide or not. I'm not sure if it's done, but there is definitely ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, and so it answers so many awful categories that I'm not sure if it's genocide or not.
A cultural boycott of Israel is gaining momentum, with stars like Javier Bardem, Olivia Colman and Mark Ruffalo refusing to work with Israeli film institutions. Countries like Ireland and Iceland have threatened to boycott Eurovision 2026 if Israel participates. At the recent Emmy Awards, actor Hannah Eibender emphasized that the boycott targets complicit institutions, not individuals, reflecting growing global pressure over the Gaza conflict. Mohammed, this is an interesting topic here, cultural isolation of Israel. How significant is this shift for Israel's image abroad? Of course, this doesn't just come down to politics, it comes down to culture as well, this war, as we see this leaking in this conflict, leaking its borders into film, into television. What are your thoughts on how the world's perspective is on Israel right now?
I hate to see individuals carrying the burden or suffering the consequences of the actions of their governments. At the end of the day, many Israelis do not condone what their government is doing. Just like the gentleman who was just speaking, the screenwriter, he clearly does not condone what his government is doing in the Palestinian occupied territories. And many members of the Israeli intelligentsia and the Israeli academic society, someone like Ilan Pappé, for example, those people have done strenuous efforts to document the injustices inflicted upon the Palestinians by successive Israeli governments, or since the inception of the Israeli state. However, I'm not surprised that there is a movement to ostracize Israel from the international community in general, including the cultural sphere, because so many people are fed up with the attempts to muzzle criticism of Israel in many Western countries. We have seen attempts on the other side. For example, in France, we've seen at the beginning of this war, before the French position on Gaza shifted as such, the French Senate passing legislation to prohibit the criticism of Israel, for example. France, a country that champions free speech, for example. We've seen American celebrities being canceled and shunned from the US media, mainstream media, because of their criticism of Israel. And this still happens until now. Now we're even seeing that the US government is willing as far to strip US citizens of their citizenships if they engage in what they call anti-Semitic activity. And of course, anti-Semitism in their view is not being anti-Jewish, which we're all against, but being being critical of Israel. You have a right to criticize any government or any country in the world, especially if that government is engaging in genocide. And by the way, Thomas, like within Israel itself, like the largest human rights organization in Israel is called B'Tselem. B'Tselem is one of the prime documenters of Israeli violations against Palestinians, including the genocide going on in Gaza. And they do play a very prominent role, for example, in all of the international efforts to hold Israel accountable on account of its actions, for example. So, but again, I do feel sad that certain individuals in the artistic community would bear the consequences of the actions of the governments. I think that there should be a dividing line between politics and art. However, I do believe that institutions that are supportive of the Israeli genocide in Gaza and Israel's behavior and intransigence in general should be targeted. However, the targeting of individuals or banning someone because he's of a certain nationality, I do not think that this is the right way to go. And I know this might be surprising coming from someone like me who's very sympathetic towards the Palestinian cause.
Mohammed Osman, thank you very much for joining us. Always an absolute pleasure to speak to you, and thank you for taking the time. We now move on and over to Europe, where Vice President of the European Commission, Kaja Kallas, has announced that the EU has proposed curbing trade ties with Israel over the war in Gaza. The Commission is working on a plan to partially suspend trade concessions given to Israel. However, this proposal is expected to face challenges as key members of the Union are reluctant to take such a measure against the country. An increasing number of European countries are criticising Israel over the expansion of the war in Gaza, with many having announced their intention to recognise a Palestinian state. The Vice President stated that this step is aimed at improving the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Let's listen in to her statements.
The Commission adopted a proposal to partially suspend trade concessions. Commissioner Šefčovič will update you on the trade details in a minute. And I want to be very clear. The aim is not to punish Israel. The aim is to improve the humanitarian situation in Gaza.
EU's Vice President Kaja Kallas also commented on India's participation in military exercises in Belarus, stating that India's purchases of Russian oil hinder closer ties with the EU. She emphasised that the EU-India partnership goes beyond trade and involves the defence of a rules-based international order. India's participation in military exercise is being viewed as an obstacle to relations. Let's listen in to what she had to say.
India's participation in Russia's military exercises and its purchase of Russian oil stand in the way of closer ties, because ultimately our partnership is not only about trade but also about defending rules-based international order. Our negotiations will address these challenges and with the aim of adopting a joint roadmap at the EU-India summit in early 2020.
We stay in Europe for our next story, where Denmark will acquire long-range precision weapons as part of an effort to bolster its military in response to the growing threat posed by Russia, Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has announced. Although there is no immediate risk of an attack on Denmark, the move comes as the country addresses military shortfalls exacerbated by years of budget cuts and the ongoing war in Ukraine. Let's take a listen in to Mette Frederiksen.
Danmark skal for første gang opbygge en militær kapacitet i form af længererækkende præcisionsvåben. Det er et paradigmeskifte i dansk forsvarspolitik. Med de våben så vil forsvaret kunne ramme mål på stor afstand og for eksempel også nedkæmpe fjendtlige missiltrusler. Det er en type våben, som vi ikke har i Danmark.
This year, Denmark significantly increased its military budget to strengthen its defence capabilities, with a focus on countering Russia's potential long-term threat to Europe. In addition, Denmark recently committed to spending 58 billion Danish crowns, which is approximately $9.2 billion, on European-made air defence systems. Defence Minister Troels Lund Poulsen emphasised the importance of both offensive and defensive capabilities, including integrated air defence and ground-based systems. Now we move on once again, where hundreds of Afghan refugees are heading to Pakistan's border area of Torkham as authorities force them to return to their home country. Pakistan has hosted Afghans fleeing violence for more than 4 decades. However, in 2023, Islamabad launched a crackdown to evict them, labelling the population as terrorists and criminals. According to the UNHCR, more than 554,000 Afghans have returned since April, including 143,000 in August alone. The Commission also said the returnees entered the country via key border crossings, including Torkham in eastern Nangarhar province, Splin Bulak in southern Kandahar province, and Abrisham in western Nimroz province. Islamabad has frequently linked Afghan refugees to rising security threats and criminal activity within its borders. Allegations rejected by Kabul, which describes the campaign as forced deportation and politically motivated. Refugees moving from Pakistan to Afghanistan have expressed their thoughts. Let's take a listen in to what they have to say.
زمان دلته پیدا شوی دی دلته موږ اوسېدلو ټیک سلاږي صحیح دی او بس داسې وي چې وروره بس هلته نه بس موږ پسې حکومت راتو هره شپه به یې تنګولو خدای شته خوا کې ګاونډیان هغې نه زنانه هم بوتلې وې هغې موږ نه مخکې ډیپورټ کړي نو موږ چې دا د ملک حالات ولیدو دا صورتحال هم ولیدو نو موږ ویلې چېرې دې نه ښه دی په عزت خپل وطن ته لاړ
زما ورور چې دا اوس تقریبا انجینرینګ کې زما یو وړوکی خور چې دا هغه هم تقریبا د میټریک پاس کړی دی یو بچی مې دی هغه تقریبا قرآن پاک حفظ کړی دا ټول تعلیم نه پاتې شو نو د جنکوي تعلیم خو افغانستان کې اسیم باندې هغه خو اسې خطا شو زما د ورور لکه لایف هغه هم خراب شو زمونږ هم سره خراب شو پاکستان کې هم داسې چوټه موټه کاروبار کوو هغه هلته پاتې شو
خو چې وس یې راسړلو ولا ګډې مو په تاوان ورکړې ولا بکرې مو په تاوان ورکړل ولا غواګانې مو په تاوان ورکړلې دا په تاوان ولاړې دی اوس د هغه نه دغه ګاډي ته ونیوله ګاډي ریټونه وختل 15 لکه او 15 لکه دا ریټونه شول په دې کې موږ غټ تاوان راغلو.
Well, that is all that we have time for, and we will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.